Tonight, I can report to the American people and to the world that the United States has conducted an operation that killed Osama bin Laden.
Where we continue to follow the capture and killing of Osama bin Laden now.
Those are just some of the scenes overnight as thousands of Americans gathered in celebration of Osama bin Laden's death.
Former Navy SEAL Rob O'Neill says he has thought about the mission every day since that May Day in 2011.
For multiple conversations you had with Rob O'Neill over the past year and a half, how'd you get
access? And you described that his head kind of exploded when you hit him.
I actually hit him 3 times because I shot him twice when he was standing and once on the ground.
That is the fucking American badass right there.
Go, go, go. We are not going for fame and we are not going for bravado. We are going for the single mom who dropped her kids off at elementary school on a Tuesday morning, and then 45 minutes later she jumped to her death out of a skyscraper.
If you need help, hang up and then dial your operator.
I'm Rob O'Neill, and this is the Operator Podcast. Welcome back to the Operator Podcast. We're in the 130s now. This is going to be episode 131, and I appreciate you joining me. We're going to have a lot of fun today, hopefully. I'm going to get into just a little bit of history because it's fun to know from where you come and what's been happening and why. And one of the phrases that's going around now is that, and you'll hear me say it too, that history is written by the victors. Witten was a tight end for the Dallas Cowboys. Hell of a good guy, by the way, too. I had a funny story about Jason Witten. I went to dinner with Jason Witten and Tony Romo back when they were both starting for the Cowboys. Good crew. Romo was a good quarterback. I think he's a really good commentator as well. I think he's smart and he knows what he's doing. People give him shit. I said written on accident. So we went to dinner in Dallas, and this is a while back when I lived in Texas. So that's a long time ago. But we were at a restaurant downtown or uptown. I still don't know the difference in Dallas. If you're a Texan from Dallas, tell me in the comments at the Operator Podcast, uptown and downtown in Dallas, because I don't know. Not a lot of mountains in Dallas. Uptown Butte's uptown. Anyway, Butte, Montana. We went to dinner, and we got done. We were all getting an Uber. There was a couple cocktails were had, and as we're leaving, Romo went over to, we're out front. It's a nice restaurant. The guys at valet are there, but we're waiting for an Uber, and Romo went over and started peeing on a tree, and I said, "Hey, man, I don't think you can do that here." And he looked back and said, "Yeah, we all know there's only one sheriff in Dallas." It's pretty funny. It was a joke. He was starting. He was good. A lot of fun. I said written. History is written by the winners is what I'm getting at, too. So I'm going to get into a little bit of history and kind of know where we're going with that based on what we see now, because there's comparisons and similarities. What's happened in the past and what's going on now, especially with relations around the world, everything from China, I'm going to focus on, to the fentanyl stuff, what's happening and why, because a lot of people don't know the why, the long war. We're too busy with instant gratification, and it's not even a 24-hour news cycle. And at a point, too, where not everybody's even a journalist. It's just, you don't need to be right. You just need to be first. So, but there's, nutty stuff is going on. This weekend, a couple days ago, there was stuff coming out of the Pentagon about UFOs, not UFOs, UAPs. And the reason I pulled this story up, not because, it's the same damn videos. F-18 pilots, 2015. It's always F-18 pilots, the ones that are out there. The F-18s land on the carriers, which are out at sea, and they're saying a lot of these UAPs are also hydrodynamic, and they have bases and whatnot underwater. A lot of subs have seen whatever. A lot of the sightings turn out to be balloons and whatnot. And there's also weapons. We just heard President Trump mention that we have weapons that no one knows about. And that, I don't know if he said this, but I've said it before, that nuclear weapons aren't even our most powerful weapons. But I pulled this up because I love how the military changes abbreviations and acronyms all the time, and I'm assuming that's because someone gets an award for being that clever. But instead of unidentified flying objects, they're now UAPs, which is unidentified aerial phenomena. But I liked it because they made a task force, the UAPTF, which is the Unidentified Aerial Phenomena Task Force. It should be the UAPTFFY for the Unidentified Aerial Phenomena Task Force. Fuck yeah. But yeah, they're seeing a lot of this stuff, and I've heard every kind of weird story about how they're reattacking the Russians and whatnot. I'm looking at pictures right now, and what exactly they're. Why would they be attacking Russian soldiers and turning them into stone? I don't know, but that'll be interesting to get into. Also, I mentioned last week in episode 130, Tariffs for Dummies. And again, bear with me because I call it Tariffs for Dummies because I needed to know more about tariffs. And the best way to learn something is to teach it. You can memorize it. You can read it out loud. Once you teach something, hopefully you know what it is. And I've taught classes before where I wasn't quite prepared. This is when I was a young Navy SEAL, and you realize real quick that if you don't know what you're talking about, you better be good at bullshitting because it's about to go down. But with the tariffs and with stuff that's going on with social media, like I mentioned, the less than 24-hour news cycle, a lot of stuff is getting emotional. And that's part of the whole process, too. What it boils down to, and by it I mean everything, what it boils down to is follow the money. Someone somewhere is getting paid for something. So why would there be vested interest in emotions? Well, because people act funny when they're emotional, and we see it all the time. I give presentations to companies about why we were successful as Navy SEALs, the traits common to our success, and one of them is do your best not to make decisions based on emotion because you're probably going to be wrong. The best example I have, I stole it from my father-in-law, Tommy Halpin. He said if you write you can write that mean email, but don't hit send for 24 hours. And if it still bothers you, if it still bothers you, then it might be worth it. And that's the same thing as take a breath, take a step back. Or nowadays, when I find myself getting worked up, I'll just take a walk and know you're going to feel better soon. But don't hit send, man. Don't hit tweet. Jeez. Get in trouble for tweets. I got in trouble in 2020 for tweets. Bullshit. I was right. So, but decision making, there's all kinds of outcomes that come with it. And, I'm reading some of my notes here. I was thinking about some of the decisions that were made in my career and whatnot, and the emotions they're an integral part of the human experience, but you can't rely solely on them to make your decisions. A prime example nowadays is bring up anything online, climate change, abortion, trans women in sports, stuff like that, and emotions are going to start flying. Bring up anything on X and emotions start flying. Because people got biased for different things, and it's not that people think they're right. They know they're right. And also both sides are kind of guilty of it, one more than the other, but they don't want to hear the other person's point of view. I mean, look what the left did to Elon Musk. Just because of emotions. They're great. They make us who we are, but they need to be tempered by reason to avoid idiocy. Like we've seen, remember Trust the Science? A lot of emotion with COVID, everything from the vaccines to the lack of vaccines to the mask to all the crap. And just people getting spun out of control. I remember the Colbert Show had those dudes dressed up as syringes, and they're singing like the Pee Wee Herman version of vaccines instead of tequila. That's stupid. And I don't know if they thought it was entertaining, whatever, crazy time. The best time of the lockdown, I think, was when we were all watching Tiger King. But, emotions are fundamental of who you are, but they can dominate the process of decision-making. And we've seen it in history. I'm going to get into China and stuff like that, U.S.-China geopolitical tensions, a lot of emotion in there. And the problem is, especially now, too, is when you speak the truth, emotions get involved because if you offend stupid people, they get emotional. We should be in a place where you can say something, have an argument, listen, and then retort. But now we just shout each other down. I mean, I'm going to get into the U.S.-China trade war. But little things like in 2022, I don't know if you're... So China is really big into Taiwan. They want Taiwan. They consider it part of the Chinese Communist Party, part of historic China. They want it back, but we don't want them to get it. It's some of the microchip stuff. It always comes down to power. It always comes down to trade. Who's in the best position? China wants it. We don't want them to have it. But Nancy Pelosi went over to Taiwan to visit in 2022, and that just pissed the Chinese off. They started doing military drills. There was economic sanctions and escalated tensions, between both sides, rising fears, war games, all that stuff. And like I said, too, it just gets worse with social media, platforms like X, and then misinformation. And again, that's with other players that want to hurt morale. They're going to give you bad stuff. And it's the whole trust but verify. Don't just believe something is true because you read it. A lot of times it's an algorithm or a bot or a paid agitator, and I'm not picking on one side or the other or the third. But the emotions are going to get you fired up, and I'm guilty of it too. That's why I like to put the phone down and go outside and take a walk. But it's instead of short-term endorphins or whatever it is you get from yelling or screaming, you got to think about long-term consequences too. And it can, the emotions, they have a tendency to prioritize feelings over like sustainable outcomes and stuff like that. They're good for motivating action. If you're emotional about going to the gym, that's great. But making decisions based solely on emotion is it's bad because it leads to bias. It'll escalate the conflicts that you're trying to de-escalate, and it'll even neglect the short-term consequences. But they can inspire. They can be good. Emotions can be fine, but there's got to be a time and a place for them. So that's my thoughts here on the emotional part of all this goodness. So I'm going to get into that. I'm going to do a little history about what's going on with the. Well, I mean, I brought up emotions because of the tariffs, because everyone's getting all fired up and they're watching. If you're not in the market, watching your portfolio go down, you're losing money. Some people are saying they lost millions of dollars. It's horrible. If you stick with it, does it come back? The long-term effects, short-term sell, is it worth it? Who knows? But what I would tell my guys in combat, and I've probably mentioned this before, just to keep it simple, is don't react, do respond. And that might take a second. It might take a second, even if a second's all you have, to make an informed decision. What do we say? The definition of bravery is just waiting one more second and then doing it anyway. So, but I want to mention before I get into this, though, the sponsor of the show, and I've talked about Qualia Senolytic before, because I mean, I just turned 49. That's right. 1 year away from 50, or as I like to think of it, 16 years away from 65. Boom. Math teacher for a mom. But, the ickies and the aches and pains that come with the job that I used to do, a bunch of skydives, lower back, knees from downwind landings and whatnot. And I'm at the point now where I'm like even picking up my baby. It starts to ache a little bit. The damn gym, it's like even a few days back, being back in the gym, the being older, the recovery process is longer and it just kind of sucked. But talking about Qualia Senolytic, the first of its kind formula designed to help your body naturally eliminate senescent cells, the zombie cells that I've talked about before. And I believe one of the best aging breakthroughs is Qualia Senolytic, and here's why. Senolytics are a science field revolutionizing human aging, almost reversing it. A big culprit behind that middle-aged feeling can be senescent cells, or the zombie cells that linger in your body after their useful function. They just hang out. They're wasting energy and resourcefulness. So let me break it down. The accumulation of zombie cells can lead to less energy, slower recovery from working out, joint discomfort, and basically feeling like an old man. Qualia Senolytic is a groundbreaking, clinically tested supplement with 9 vegan, plant-derived compounds that help your body naturally eliminate the zombie cells, and they will help you feel years younger in just months. And I'm speaking from experience, dude. Here's how it works. You take it 2 days a month, helping your body naturally eliminate the zombie cells to age better at the cellular level. And Qualia's breakthrough formulation is vegan, non-GMO, tested by leading scientists. Since I started taking Qualia Senolytic, I wake up fired up. Like, I'm not kidding. Like, I'll look at my alarm doesn't even go off. I wake up before it and look at it, and sometimes I wonder, like, is 3:30 too early to get out of bed and go to the gym? That's how good I've been feeling. More energy, not as sore as I was even as a young Navy SEAL. A ton more energy, and I'm just excited about life again. So experience the science of feeling younger. Go to qualialife.com/theoperator for up to 50% off your purchase, and use code THEOPERATOR for an additional 15%. That's qualialife.com, QUALIA life.com/theoperator for an extra 15% off your purchase. Your older self will thank you. And thanks to Qualia for sponsoring the show. It's great to have you around, and thank you for making me feel younger. Go to qualialife.com/theoperator. So, speaking of emotion, I brought that up because I want to talk about the fentanyl issue in this country and in the West, and who the major players are, why China's involved with it too, because the issue with China, not the issue, but a fact about China is that they're playing the long game. They're playing the 1,000-year game. They're playing, President Xi has said that China will take over the world, will dominate the world, which, don't want to think about that. But it's the fentanyl is on purpose. It's here in the United States. It's killing almost 100,000 people, or was. It's on purpose. It's a war. We are being infiltrated. Drug warfare is not uncommon knowledge with Chinese leadership. I'm going to go back a little bit and tell you why they want to do this, because during the 19th century, China was the target for the West, particularly Great Britain. But the Chinese people, so the Chinese government was the target, but the Chinese people were the victims, and they were doing this on purpose as well. This is like a little bit of reverse technology. The Opium Wars arose from tensions over the opium trade right around that part of Asia, which Britain heavily promoted despite China's bans due to its addictive and disruptive effects. So China didn't want opium in there, but the Brits did. And this is when you get back into stuff, you'll hear the words like industrialization or colonization and stuff like that, and words that get thrown around a lot too, like Bernie Sanders rolling around the country, fighting for everything. But he's been out there since the 80s yelling, "We don't need an oligarchy. We don't need an oligarchy." There's like a skit out there online. It literally shows him saying the same thing from 1983 up until now. We don't need an oligarchy. Anyway, the reason this is I don't know why I just did that. The opium trade this is back in China. Again, this is why they're doing the long game. The opium trade emerged as a significant issue with Chinese-Western relations during the 18th and early 19th centuries. Britain facing a trade deficit due to the high demand for Chinese goods. Notice I bring up trade deficits. You're talking tariffs again. It comes down to trade. It comes down to trade routes, money. Are we making good deals? But there's a high demand for Chinese goods at this time. So this is the 19th century and 18th century. But goods like tea, silk, and porcelain were expensive. So the Brits turned to opium, primarily sourced from India, as a means to balance the trade. Is that fair? Fair trade? Probably not. But Britain viewed the opium trade as economically vital. So by the late 18th century, the British East India Company, so it's called the East India Company, it's British, was selling significant quantities of opium with exports reaching, now this is back in the day, so they were selling them in chests full, so 4,000 chests annually, and each chest was like 100, they told me in kilograms, but scholars can figure that out. I don't know. No one knows how much a kilogram is. But they weighed 170 pounds, so 4,000 chests would be approximately 680,000 pounds of opium annually. This is the late 18th century. This trade grew dramatically from about 1820, with imports reaching 30,000 chests, which would be a little over 5 million pounds by 1833. So this is the build-up to the wars. This led to widespread addiction and social disruption. With addiction comes disruption, and this is in China. The East India Company made it cheap. They sold it cheap, and opium was everywhere in China. The British East India Company basically became the world's first drug cartel because it eventually produced all the opium in the world. They got a complete, they got the market corner, they got a monopoly, and they eventually got about 25% of the Chinese population hooked on opium. Even though there were efforts to stop it, the Brits always responded with heavy hands. They always came in militarily. They had a really strong Royal Navy. I think they'd only been beaten a few times. I'm not going to bring that up. So the Royal Navy would come in and they'd keep it flowing because they would, not necessarily. I mean, that's even the opposite of deterrence. That's like bullying. The big bully shows up. And people in the West consider this fair game and legitimate, including future President FDR. His grandfather, Warren Delano Jr., I actually read about this part in Peter Schweitzer's book, Blood Money. If you haven't read that book, Blood Money is really good. It gets deep into a lot of the stuff and some of the corruption, explains stuff like that, like Warren Delano Jr. I didn't even know about him until I read that book. I read it once, and I kind of skimmed through it a lot because there's good points in there. But before the opium, before the East India Company brought opium into China, just for trade, they're trying to make trade more fair. China had the strongest economy in the world. But after, it was in shambles, man. The economy sucked. But so by the early 1800s, opium imports soared, leading to widespread addiction and economic strain in China. That's why their economy went down. So we get into the Opium Wars. The first Opium War was about 1839 to 1842. The second Opium War was several years later, a little over a decade later, 1856 to 1860. Critical juncture in modern Chinese history because it led to, now this is what's important, it led to China's century of humiliation. That's what they call it. China's century of humiliation refers to the period from the mid-19th century to the mid-20th century. So we're talking after World War II, roughly from the first Opium War in 1839 to the end of the Chinese Civil War in 1949. This era is characterized by foreign imperialism. I said you'd hear imperialism again. You hear that a lot. Professors love to throw that around. People going in and taking stuff that, is debatable. Internal strife, significant loss of Chinese territory and sovereignty. So the century of humiliation I believe I got these in chronological order. The key aspects are the first Opium War, which I mentioned, were 1839, 1842. Britain defeated China, leading to the Treaty of Nanjing, which ceded Hong Kong to Britain and opened several Chinese ports to foreign trade. We're getting into why China is not that big on foreigners either. We have a hell of a time trading there. I don't think we can. The next one was the Second Opium War, 1856, 1860, like I mentioned. This time it was Britain. I'll get into this later, but this time it was Great Britain, France, a little bit of the U.S. They forced China now to legalize the opium trade and grant further territorial and trade concessions. China's getting backed up. They have long memories. There's treaties and treaty ports and just crap like the foreign powers established treaty ports where they enjoyed extraterritorial rights. That means is their citizens were subject to their own laws rather than Chinese laws when they went there. Kind of like in the military, there's a status of forces agreement. Similar to that, you're under the Uniform Code of Military Justice, not whatever. Spain comes to mind because that's the first port people pull in after cross the Atlantic. And then Marines, man, they can get nuts. I saw dudes come back in Spanish uniforms. They traded their uniforms, but that's another story. I got to get a Marine on here in an interview. We'll do that. There's the Taiping Rebellion. This is a little bit later, 1850 to 1864. Same kind of time frame, but that's a massive civil war that devastated large parts of China. And this is I want to say the Qing Dynasty, Qing. It weakened that dynasty. Again, they don't forget. There's the Sino-Japanese War, S-I-N-O, Sino-Japanese War. That's kind of a word for Chinese. Here's a newsflash. China and Japan didn't like each other. They still don't. But Japan defeated China, leading to the Treaty of Shimonoseki, which ceded Taiwan to Japan. So there's Taiwan again, away from China. This is, as the Chinese say, this is more humiliation. There was the Boxer Rebellion, 1899 to 1901, an anti-foreign uprising that was suppressed by an 8-nation alliance, resulting in further concessions, and the word of the decade is reparations. But China, so you can see why they're getting upset, because they keep losing, and then they're losing territory, losing wars, losing morale. There were unequal treaties, a series of treaties imposed on China by foreign powers that included territorial loss, again, indemnities, and other unfavorable terms. The warlord era from 1916 to 1928, we're talking right around World War I-ish. Following the collapse of the Qing dynasty, China was fragmented by various warlords, leading to further instability. We've seen that in a lot of different places. Afghanistan comes to mind after the Soviet invasion and how we went in there and gave them stingers. The Mujahideen beat the Russians, but then they came after us. Another one. But then another one was a Japanese invasion and World War II. So this is 1937 to 1945. So in between that, I mean, you're talking Germany, Blitzkrieg, Luftwaffe, and 1945 when we're dropping bombs all over the place. But Japan invaded, And Japan's full-scale invasion of China led to widespread devastation and atrocities, including, and this will be a full episode, the Nanjing Massacre. The Rape of Nanjing, I believe, is the name of the book, or Nanking. It's something similar. They changed the name, but it was a massacre. Estimates vary wildly of the death toll, ranging from 40,000 Chinese deaths to 300,000, with the Chinese government often citing 300,000 is the official figure. We're gonna go high there. The International Military Tribunal for the Far East estimated 200,000 deaths. That's a lot either way. 40,000, 200,000, 300,000. A lot of people dying in this. Some of the atrocities that I researched was Japanese soldiers committed systematic massacres, mass executions. They raped and estimated. Again, these are estimates, but 20,000 to 80,000 women. Civilians caught in the crossfire are subject to torture. The city was extensively looted and burned. And the Rape of Nanking, it's still recognized on December 13th as a national day of mourning. And then there was a Chinese Civil War, which was 1945 to 1949. This was between nationalists and communists. Sound familiar? The CCP, the Chinese Communist Party, ended with the communist victory and established the People's Republic of China. So the century of humiliation is a significant part of Chinese historical memory and national identity. It is often invoked by the Chinese government to underscore the importance of national unity, sovereignty, and the need to prevent such humiliations from reoccurring. So they're teaching their youth about the greatness of China, the humiliation of China, why they need to band together, why foreigners are bad, and how we need to be strong. We need to avoid these humiliations. And unlike a lot of us, instead of teaching our kids to hate our own country, with the help of algorithms from China, and then just teaching them we're based on all this horrible stuff, even though you'll notice every country, every piece of land was basically, look, none of us were there, and they were all formed by not necessarily bad actors, but of the time stuff that's not nice, I guess. But they're teaching their kids, this is what we need to do. You got a great country, you're a great person, you're smart, and they are smart. So they don't want to be humiliated again, and that's where we are with this. The century of humiliation, that's in their history. They're teaching it to them, and this is why they're serious. This is what we're getting into. I'm going to go over a couple things right now. But backing up a little bit, I'm going to get into the Opium Wars. I think they're the most important of the century of humiliation, leading to why we are where we are. But the first Opium War began when China destroyed British opium stocks in 1839, prompting Britain to send a naval expedition, and it ended with the Treaty of Nanjing in 1842. Nanjing was the capital of China at the time, and I think it was the capital of China, for you history buffs, has been around a long time, and they've had a few capitals. I think Nanjing was a capital 4 times. It's still recognized as one of China's great ancient capitals. But the first Opium War ended with ceding Hong Kong to Britain and opening up more treaty ports that I mentioned before, so welcoming in more foreigners. Britain owns Hong Kong, marking a significant loss of Chinese sovereignty. The immediate cause of the first Opium War was China's enforcement of its opium prohibition. Britain wanted to bring the opium in. They wanted to get rid of it because they saw what it was doing to the Chinese people. And it culminated in their commissioner, Lin Zexu. My Chinese is horrible. I'm not going to pretend to know it. If I say it wrong, correct me. But that commissioner destroyed British opium stocks in 1839. This action was part of a broader effort to address the outflow of silver and the social harm caused by addiction. That's interesting, isn't it? Britain, supported by merchants and the East India Company, which was their company, who owned the opium trade, demanded compensation and insisted on free trade principles, leading to escalating tensions. Free trade, zero tariffs, maybe? Escalating tensions, does it sound familiar? History, baby. The war began with a British naval expedition in June 1840, leveraging superior military technology to bombard Chinese coastal cities. And key events include the capture of, it was called Canton. I'm assuming the British named that. Gangzhou is what it's called now, I believe. Could be wrong. But they captured Canton in May of 1841 and the eventual siege of Nanjing, which forced China to the negotiating table, and the conflict ended with the Treaty of Nanjing in August 29th, 1842, marking China's first formal treaty with a Western power. And the treaty imposed significant concessions on China, and I wrote them down here. The territory they gave up was Hong Kong Island and smaller islands to Britain. They controlled those till 1997. Treaty ports were established, 5 ports open: Shanghai, Canton, Ningbo, Fuzhou, and Xiamen. And the reparations, China to pay 21 million silver dollars in reparations, 6 million immediately, the rest in installations. That's where the silver came from, I guess. And the legal privileges granted most favored nation status and extraterritoriality, great word, to Britain. These terms were all deeply humiliating. And again, if you're surrendering, you're not going to get the best deal. But China didn't like it, and it established a precedent for unequal treaties. They're going to do it now. They'll do it in the future, and marking the beginning of Western dominance in China, which they do not like. Then followed up by the Second Opium War. That's in 1856. Lasted 4 years, triggered by further trade disputes and the Arrow Incident. The Arrow Incident, its pivotal incident, was the boarding of a British registered ship, Arrow, in 1856. What they would do is the British would use Chinese ships, but they would fly the Brit flag, and they would they should have British captains. But when the Arrow was taken by the Chinese, the skipper was not on board, but there were reports of the flag being lowered and trampled, which, again, you're going to get an emotional response, led to Britain, France, and the U.S. To respond. This led to Britain demands for apologies and, what's our favorite word, reparations. And why did France join? Well, France joined the conflict following the execution of a French missionary. And this is again history. We don't know all about it, but this is what I found. It refers to the killing of Auguste Chapdelaine, a French Catholic missionary from Paris Foreign Missionary Society in China on February 29th. He was killed in China. February 29th, 1856. Chapdelaine, he was born in Normandy, France, in 1814, and he'd been ordained a priest in 1843 and arrived in China right around 1852 to join the Catholic mission. He's going to spread Catholicism. At the time, foreigners were forbidden from entering this region due to heightened suspicion of Christians amid the Taiping Rebellion, which had destabilized the Qing dynasty and fueled anti-foreign sentiment. There that is again. Chapdelaine was arrested by local Chinese authorities while conducting missionary work. He was tortured and executed, reportedly being beaten and then placed in a cage where he died. He was put in there because he refused to denounce his Catholic faith. The execution took place in an area not open to foreigners, violating the limited rights Western missionaries had under existing treaties. France used this incident as a pretext to join Britain in the Second Opium War, which was already brewing due to the trade disputes. The French government, under pressure from Catholic interests and seeking to expand its influence in China, cited the missionary's death, the priest's death, as casus belli, to just basically it's less Latin. It basically means to justify military actions alongside Britain, despite initial neutrality in the conflict. Historians have said they use this as an excuse to further their state and expand trade routes. Again, it's all about trade. Historians have argued that Chapdelaine's execution was exploited for, another word you're going to hear a lot, imperialist gain. Imperialist. France had not typically launched punitive military expeditions for the death of missionaries anywhere else in the world. And the broader geopolitical context, Britain's likely victory and France's desire for imperial expansion in China suggest the incident was a convenient excuse rather than the sole cause of French involvement. And that's debatable. They might have used it. They might have been pissed about them killing one of their guys, but they did go in and trade was involved. Lord Elgin, the British High Commissioner, noted the French ultimatum over Chapdelaine's death as a calculated move. The war resulted in the treaties of Tianjin and the Convention of Peking, which, among other concessions, granted Christians the right to spread their faith and allowed French missionaries to hold property in China, as stipulated in Article 6 of the Sino-French Peking Convention. And again, yeah, the missionary was killed. That's bad. He was tortured. That's bad. But we're moving. We're getting more territory for France and for Britain. But anyway, the missionary, the priest, Chap Delane, was later beatified in 1900. Beatification, Catholic, is a formal process in the Roman Catholic Church by which the deceased person is declared blessed. So he's definitely in heaven. And they're in heaven and can intercede on behalf of those who pray to them. Pray for them. I lost my shit. Please find it for me. It's a step toward canonization, which is the process of becoming a saint. And he was canonized by Pope John Paul II on October 1st, 2000, as one of 120 Christian martyrs who died in China between the 17th and 20th centuries. This event remains a significant point of contention in Sino, am I saying it wrong? Western relations, Chinese-Western relations, reflecting the broader tensions over foreign influence and missionary activities during the Qing dynasty's decline. Anyway, both powers sought to expend trading privileges, including the legalization of opium and access to more ports. So the war began, Second Opium War began with British and French forces attacking Canton in 1856, capturing the city by late 1857, and by May of 1858, Allied troops reached Tianjin, forcing negotiations that resulted in the treaties of Tianjin. However, tensions escalated in 1860 when Chinese forces resisted, leading to the sack of Old Summer Palace, Ming Yuan, and the occupation of Beijing, or Peking at the time. The Convention of Peking, signed later, October of 1860, confirmed the earlier treaties and imposed further concessions that resulted in the treaties of Tianjin and the Convention of Peking, the legalization of opium, and again, the expanding of foreign privileges and further weakening China. So China's getting pretty pissed off here. And all of this stuff, especially the two opium wars, led to the decline of the Qing dynasty, the social disruption from the opium, the shift in the global power dynamics, because China was the most powerful economy in the world. This brought it down. Now we started to favor Western interest and imperialism. There's our word again. Imperialism based on what your professor told you. They love that word too. That's why I was bringing up Bernie Sanders. Oligarchy. This left a lasting legacy on China's national identity, and they're proud, and foreign relations. So to recap, the Qing dynasty, recognizing the detrimental effects of opium, issued multiple bans, including edicts in 1729. This is way before the war. 1799, 1814, 1831. But smuggling and corruption undermined these efforts. The Chinese government's attempt to suppress the trade, particularly the destruction of those 20,000 chests of opium, set stage for conflict. So what were the outcomes of the Second Opium War that further eroded Chinese sovereignty? Was the legalization of opium, officially legalized, and that just hurts society. Additional treaty ports, 10 more ports. China doesn't like that. Neither would you, man. I mean, we got PO'd to China for getting down there in the Panama Canal, but now foreign companies have access to China. Territorial expansion, because Britain gained control of a couple different places, all adjacent to Hong Kong, which they had from the first one, and diplomatic privileges. Foreign diplomats granted residence in Beijing, Peking, and that's, again, the foreign influence coming in. It's like the spies that go to NYU and Columbia. They're very it's like the honeypots that go up to congressmen and sleep them and learn all the secrets and then blackmail them. You don't hear a lot of politicians talking about China. When they have meetings, they don't really bring up the fentanyl because bought and paid for, a little blackmail here and there. Again, these treaties, Western influence, and it's almost like China thought of themselves as a semi-colonized state. Again, a professor word there. And they had a profound effect on China, weakening the dynasty, exposing its military, administrative inadequacies, which a lot of people are saying could happen right now because they haven't really been to war in a while. How are they going to be? I hope we don't have to find out. But the political decline, the Qing dynasty's government inability to resist Western powers. The people don't like that. The Western powers were undermining their authority, contributing to internal rebellions like the Taiping Rebellion. We mentioned that earlier. The social disruption of the opium because of legalization, it made the addiction a lot worse. Social decay, economic strain, and the opening of the treaty ports facilitated greater foreign economic domination, often at the expense of local industries. And then, of course, they're nationalists, man. They're proud nationalists, the Chinese people, and this is national humiliation. The wars marked the beginning of China's century of humiliation, which it got into. The loss of Hong Kong and the sacking of the Old Summer Palace remains potent symbols of this era with cultural artifacts like the 12 bronze animal head statues that were looted, 7 of which were returned in December of 2020. But the wars also prompted social reform with the Qing dynasty initiating modern educational institutions like the Sino-Western College, 1895, the Nanyang College, 1896, and that's the predecessor to Shanghai Jiaotong University. And they're basically putting these together so you can learn from the West, which, they're kind of doing now, but they're doing it a different way. So what are the lasting effects of the Opium Wars? They left a legacy on China's relations with the West, underscoring the importance of national strength and, a sovereign Chinese nation. They're teaching about this so that they want to have strong political discourse in China. They're teaching their people that too. They're not teaching them how bad they are. They're actually playing the victim, and they're playing it pretty well. But now they're to a point where even their ferries that bring people back and forth to work are made to military specs in case the Great War starts. It also highlighted the ethical dimensions of imperialism. Like you go in there, is it imperialism? Is it that what the professors like to say? Possibly, but what was everyone's role in promoting opium addiction? You can blame a lot of this on opium, and the Chinese do. Again, the victim. Research suggests that Britain leaders were aware of opium's habit-forming properties, but they were just saying it's legit too. The war, economically, the war had mixed effects with the treaty ports accelerating industrialization through technology transfer and market access, but also the long-term impact is evident in modern China's emphasis on avoiding weakness. That's what they're good at. They always project strength. They rarely admit fault. They never admit fault, and they'll lie straight to your face. One of their sayings, too, this I like, too, I actually highlighted it for myself, was, if you are backward, you will take a beating. So these opium wars, I'm getting deep into this so you can kind of understand what they're teaching their kids, and no one's going to go over this on TikTok, or actually only have a set amount of time or characters. But the opium wars were a turning point in Chinese history, but they're still teaching it today, which is important. They know their history, at least their perception of history. They teach a period of foreign domination, internal strife, and this lasted over a century. These wars exposed the vulnerabilities of the Qing dynasty, the aggressive expansion of Western powers. I mentioned that before, leaving a lasting imprint on China's identity and global position. It reshaped China's internal dynamics, and the way they teach it is it keeps their people pissed off, essentially, and they still want revenge. They're even teaching today that this Western incursion turned China into a minor power in the world. They consider the greatest drug war in modern history. Over in China, they actually teach never forget. Our biggest problem over here is we keep forgetting to never forget. But they still want to avenge the opium wars is the total theme of today. What I'm talking about. They think that not only is poisoning your enemy justified, it's patriotic. About 60 years ago, just after the beginning of communist China, the party started pushing opium into Japan. So now they got their opium. That part of the world, opium is prevalent. There's no love lost there with Japan and China, so they start pushing opium into Japan now, about 60 years later. So just after the communist Chinese party took rise, they're still avenging their loss to them, and the U.S. was not far behind. The CCP tried to get opium into the U.S. at first through ports in San Francisco and New York. They were seized. They were successful getting it in Japan, and the addiction led to everything. Power, secrets, strategic material. Spies use it the same way they honeypot our politicians. You get them addicted. What are they going to do for more? They're going to start telling you stuff. The CCP started their major push in the 50s and were looking for partners to expand it in the West. Here's where it gets really interesting, too, because we've seen some movies about Vietnam. You've probably met Vietnam veterans. China was involved in a lot of our fights. They're involved in Korea. I've heard stories of 1 million men fighting, Chinese fighting Americans, U.S. Marines who were like 17 years old. Jeff Gumm's grandfather. Jeff Gumm, my buddy from Sunga Life, tells a story about like when he's working out or hurt or sore, and he thinks of his grandfather who at like 17 or 18 had been shot a couple times. He's fighting 1 million people. His story, he tells it better than me, but you get the gist. China was fighting us there. They're fighting us in Vietnam. By the early 1960s, they were hitting major ports in the U.S., and they were starting to focus more efforts on the GIs, the troops in Vietnam. China was already supporting the NVA, the North Vietnamese regulars, and the Viet Cong with weapons of training, kind of like we do in some places, if you notice. But also, they started pumping in heroin, like not the skunk shit either, the good stuff. Chinese officials were bragging all over the world that they were growing the finest opium in the world, and they were giving it to U.S. soldiers in Vietnam and other places around Asia and Japan on the cheap. And what they were saying was, do you remember what they did to us? And yes, they do, because they teach their history. Their plan was to use heroin to shatter the morale of troops in the jungle. The U.S. will never see it coming, so they started targeting troops all over Asia. We'll never see it coming. Maybe we see it coming, but we refuse to believe it, because we're big believers that just because we're not at war with someone, it must mean they're not at war with us. Not the case. There was a 3-star, this is a cool story, there was a 3-star general, U.S. Marine, Lewis Walt. This dude fought in this kick-ass warrior, this general officer, fought in World War II, where he was awarded 2 Navy Crosses. I mean, that's kick-ass times 2. And he also fought in Korea. He later became the assistant commandant of the U.S. Marine Corps. And one of his quotes was, he was sent over to Vietnam to address or at least investigate the deal with heroin. And he said in June of 1970, immediately after our Cambodian incursion, South Vietnam was flooded with heroin of remarkable purity. And he said it was 94% to 97%, which was sold at the ridiculously low price of $1 or $2 a vial. And this is telling something, because dudes addicted to heroin, even on an E2 pay in Vietnam in the 70s, they'd still pay $5-10 without batting an eye to get their fix. The same vial in New York City at that time cost $250, and dudes over there are getting high on 10%. They're pumping 97% pure. And so, I mean, it's so obvious because of this. The pumping heroin into Vietnam was not for profit. It was political revenge. For what? The Opium Wars. They remember their heritage. They wanted as many troops hooked as fast as possible, and they wanted them hit as hard as possible, because they're getting you from the inside. They're screwing with morale. If someone's high, they don't have your back. What am I doing in this jungle? Why am I fighting? The heroin did not help. The same general said the distribution was carried out with military precision, highly coordinated. Like I said, 97% pure in people in New York, 10%. And the drugs turned out to be just as effective as they had planned. Dudes were getting addicted. Slam morale. It actually contributed to the Nixon administration starting a massive pullout. That's not in our history books, is it? Then the U.S. government was realizing they could have better trade with China. So that's when the drug talk started to fade. They were bringing it up before. They sent the general over, but now, wait. We can trade with these guys. We can make money. So we don't need to talk about how the GIs are getting killed. We don't need to talk about the morale, why we're in Vietnam, that kind of stuff. They didn't want to mention it because it could have a negative effect on their personal finances and power. Does that sound familiar? I mean, before that, at the time, we were flying recon missions over Southeast Asia to see these poppy fields like Cambodia, Laos, Burma. But those were brought to a halt by then Secretary of State Henry Kissinger. Burma was a major ally of the Chinese Communist Party. We don't want to damage business no matter what's happening to the dudes on the ground. And we've been meeting with China. In the Biden administration, they met quite a bit. The Trump administration is now. But, whenever they went over to meet with China, they talked about everything important. Ukraine, climate change, Taiwan, which is important, Tibet, But they didn't talk about... they did talk about WMD. Nukes are bad, but they didn't talk about WMD is weapons of mass destruction. Fentanyl takes about 100,000, at least it was 100,000 Americans a year. It's a synthetic opioid. Think about this: the fentanyl crossing our southern and northern border takes more lives in a year than the wars in Afghanistan, Iraq, and Vietnam combined. It takes more lives than the bomb that we dropped on Nagasaki. Fentanyl is the leading cause of death for Americans under the age of 45. It's intentional. It's being covertly distributed, aimed at American citizens by a superpower, and is the most lethal peacetime attack in world history ever. Period. And the deaths have been unintentional by the victims because the military precision we talked about, we're talking about plants that are making fake. People think they're taking prescription drugs sometimes. They're taking a full blast of fentanyl and it kills them. Sometimes it's laced in weed, it's laced in blow, and that's not people taking prescription drugs. They're just trying to get their freak on. They're just trying to get a little fired up on that early Saturday morning. I don't know if you remember, here's the fentanyl. And this is a story too, wasn't there? But this couple of years ago, a group of dudes from West Point went to Fort Lauderdale, and 4 of these dudes bought cocaine. Party Central. Shouldn't be doing that, gentlemen. That's one of the first rules of whatever they teach in the Army, but I know that zero tolerance is one of them. But 4 of them brought cocaine. It was laced. They immediately went into cardiac arrest, right? So these 4 dudes are down. Then 3 dudes tried to give them CPR. They went into cardiac arrest. That's how strong this stuff is. They all went to the emergency room. They all survived. But right now, the way the China's working with getting the stuff over here, having the plants here, getting across, they're working with the cartels. Cartels are not good dudes. They're pretty vicious. Even they call fentanyl El Diablo. It's the deadliest drug out there, and it should be. I mean, we've had people in the government try to label it as a weapon of mass destruction, which it is. But the logistics to get there are this. They get the material to make the fentanyl and produce it in Mexico and Canada. Fake pill plants in Mexico and the U.S. to distribute, and the facilitation to get it into the streets. And high-level Chinese Communist Party are involved because of the layers involved. And because of the layers involved, they can deny it, which they do. We believe them because our media and our politicians who might be complicit want us to believe that. We believe what we're told. Our lawmakers have been in denial. They've even lied about it. Why is that? How many California congressmen or senators mention China ever? They don't. Why? Congress has evidence, and it's easily accessible that China's involved in this, but they stay away from it. I mean, even right now, we're talking about China, but more interested in trade and tariffs. What happened on day one? But the money is so good. I mean, how many times have you heard someone say, we just don't want to disrupt the U.S.-China relationship? Well, they're disrupting the shit out of it. We're not even really talking about it. I mean, we are, but not as much as we should. This is a major invasion. This is warfare. China's actually had officers openly admit to this. And they've done it before with heroin and meth, Vietnam. There's a book they wrote, these 2 officers wrote called Unrestricted Warfare. I think it's really hard to find them. I wrote it down because it was in some of Peter Schweitzer's notes. But allegedly they got this book and China wanted it gone because they didn't want they didn't want people to know what they were doing. But they told their officers they want to think outside the box. Non-military weapons they can use against their adversaries or enemies, and nothing was too extreme. Nothing was forbidden. That's why they don't care about killing innocent people with these drugs. They agreed this type of incursion would result in massive addiction across the United States, which we see, and that would spiral. What does it ruin? It ruins the family. It ruins the nuclear family because of the addiction. A bad family can ruin the neighborhood and the community. Based on crime alone, people start stealing stuff because they need to get their fix. Lots of addicts resort to theft and violence. I mean, gangs get worse in certain areas too. We've seen it with all kinds of drugs just because the demand skyrockets. And just if you think about the reason China's doing this, and it's blatantly obvious, the question would be, why aren't we more serious? I mean, we are now, sort of. But, I mean, we're more talking about, bad things happen when we open the borders, and millions of people came in. There's no denying that. We do mention fentanyl. Why isn't there an outcry for 100,000 Americans dying in a year? I mean, it's brought up. The families are obviously pissed. There's not an outcry, really. Is there? Yeah, I don't know. But that's why I wanted to give a quick lesson on history. That's why the fentanyl's coming here. That's why they're trying so hard, because they're at war with us, and that influences everything. If everyone's high, maybe the trade won't be so good for us. And they can take advantage of it. The tariff war. Thank God. I mean, I'm not. I'm just talking from the community, the nuclear family. But it adds up. So that's. I just wanted to give a little bit of just a history lesson on why they would want to use that, because we used it against them before. So take it for what you will, and that is that. So it's interesting though with the tariffs and whatnot. there should be more conversation about this. But that's sort of a history. It makes sense if you think about it. And a lot of stuff, too, from the algorithm that China will send here for our kids to look at anti-American propaganda, why they would send fentanyl through places, why they would be in cahoots with layered intel going through cartels, so they have the plausible deniability. They can say that, they can say they're not doing it, and our politicians that they've either paid off or blackmailed, they're not going to roger it up either. It's really hard to not hard to comprehend, but once you pull the wool off, like I mentioned at the beginning about emotions, they can cloud your thinking. I mean, it's pretty obvious what's happening too. It's with the tariffs now too. Look at some of the stocks. I mean, the NBA's taking a hit. I mentioned with John Cena speaking Mandarin, apologizing because of the movies. They want the market, and people will do anything for the money. The NBA wants the market. The Nike gets some sweet deals. A lot of stuff's bought in China because, I mean, you don't want to know why, but it's a lot cheaper over there. Not the same regulations, and they're allowed to do stuff that's untoward. I love that phrase, untoward word. But yeah. So I did get some feedback from the last one, the tariff thing, which I mentioned at the beginning of this in last week's episode, which is 130, which you can check it out because hopefully my explanation of tariffs made sense. Not my explanation of tariffs, though. I need to mention my financial advisor. I'm actually going to give you his number, and I'm not even BSing. Roger Johnson, Rodger. Roger Johnson. He's got Johnson Financial Group in Tyler, Texas. That's where it's at. And whenever I have any issue, I'm just telling you because this is good biz. Everything from estate planning to wills, whatnot, and just taking care of me so I sound smart. Roger Johnson, call Johnson Financial Group at 903-581-2098. That's his office. 903-581-2098. If you want to know where I get my kick-ass monologue and podcast info as far as tariffs and finances, give Roger a call. Great guy, great friend, and I'm giving him a shout out because he helped me with my tariff conversation. Whenever you hear me mention finances and how brilliant I am, it's Roger Johnson. Johnson Financial Group is 903-581-2098. So I hope you enjoyed the just a little bit of a history lesson again at the Operator Podcast on Instagram at Mick Huya. Again, I will X and Twitter. I will sometimes look at those. I've been a bit busy with some stuff, big stuff coming up too. I got some trips coming, trying to get some dudes involved with future projects. So I'm very excited about that. I'm excited to tell you about it. Got to get their go ahead, but some of them are people you've heard of, and some of them are people you haven't heard of yet. But I hope you do and wish you had or whatever. So, just hang out there, get your finances in order. Don't be afraid of the tariff. Stop making decisions based on emotion and avoid fentanyl, and you're never out of the fight.